Hello everybody and welcome to my first video about the history of Japan. As you may have read at the beginning of this video, I am not a professional historian and all the information I got from public sources. The voice narration is done by an artificial intelligence-based speaker and in my opinion, he does his job well. I hope it does not make anyone uncomfortable. Also, I frequently utilize online translators to translate from my native language to English, which can sometimes result in awkward phrasing. Japan is a country with a unique and captivating history, and we will try to explore it all. Perhaps when watching movies or anime you have ever wondered where all these plots about samurais, ninjas, pirates, or perhaps alternative Tokyo, cyberpunk, and so on came from. I will try to touch on these topics and give insight into what episodes in Japanese history influenced it. I cannot delve too deeply into each individual topic, as I am not qualified to do so, and it would compromise the flow and coherence of the overall narrative. Let's get started. First, let's take a look at what Japan is all about. It is an archipelago made up of many islands, but the most important are four. From north to south are the islands of Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. At first glance, the country seems small, but in fact, it's only an illusion, because Japan occupies all of these islands, and the area of Japan is larger than modern Germany, for example. But it's not that simple. If you look in the center of all these islands, you will see that there is a huge, long ridge of mountains almost the entire territory of Japan, and only a small part of the entire area is suitable for any kind of farming and living on these plains. This will define the whole of Japanese history for a very long time. Let's look at this map now. Japan is in a unique location, situated at the intersection of four lithospheric plates that constantly collide and move. This results in various natural disasters such as tsunamis, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. And Japan is experiencing all of this geological activity, and it's likely shaped ancient Japan's culture and beliefs. Living with these conditions has significantly impacted the country's history, forcing its people to adapt to the environment. Now a little bit about mountains. The abundant mountain ranges in Japan hindered communication and interaction among people. If you think of the history of some other countries, for example, Egypt, where rivers provided an easy means of transportation and trade. You can build a simple boat, load goods on it, and sail down the river to trade, or just move around. It's very convenient. There is no such convenient system in Japan. Of course, there are rivers, and there are a lot of them, but mostly they are not navigable rivers, at least not in ancient times. They are mostly very rugged mountain rivers and streams that run at tremendous speeds, and it is very inconvenient to use them for transportation, and instead of helping people interact with each other, they rather hinder it. Due to Japan's geographical features, ancient Japanese people had limited interaction with those from different regions until they learned to overcome the limitations of their environment. So, in terms of state formations, settlements and cities in Japan were scattered and had limited contact with each other. So, let's summarize the geography of Japan. It is located at the junction of tectonic plates, which constantly leads to natural disasters, and people have to cope with it somehow. Secondly, the whole of Japan is crisscrossed by mountain ranges, which ancient people were almost unable to overcome. So they had to settle on flat land, which is very, very small, and very little land suitable for farming. And there are also a huge number of obstacles to communication. Now we might have a perfectly logical question. If Japan is an island, how did people get there in the first place? People ended up there very simply. They just came there on foot. The first settlers in Japan likely arrived via a land bridge connecting the island to the Asian mainland. This bridge existed around 30,000 years ago when sea levels were lower due to lower temperatures and reduced glacial melt. And so people moving from the west to the east reached Korea, realized that they could go even further, and came to Japan. And later on, as temperatures rose and glaciers melted, sea levels rose and the land bridge disappeared, isolating Japan from the mainland. Due to their lack of advanced seafaring technology, the first settlers in Japan remained isolated and were unable to interact with other cultures. This changed much later in history, as advancements in shipbuilding and navigation allowed for greater connectivity with the world. Let's imagine a classic Japanese person. Now take a look at these pictures. If you look at these photos, you will notice that the people in them have a unique appearance, with features that differ from the modern Japanese. The Ainu people of Japan are considered to be the oldest indigenous population in the country, with a history dating back to the first settlers who arrived around 30,000 years ago and successfully existed and developed before the ancestors of modern Japanese. The Ainu have a rich cultural heritage, but their numbers have diminished over time, and today there are relatively few Ainu people remaining, mostly on Hokkaido Island. Nevertheless, they remain an important part of Japan's history and cultural identity. When the Ainu people first arrived in Japan, they utilized the most advanced technology of the time, which was stone tools, to survive. They produce stone tools, they fish and hunt, and what is interesting is that they hardly developed any further and stayed in almost Stone Age state for forever. Probably the reason for this is the lack of necessity. There is plenty of food, fish, wild animals, stone for tools, and opportunities for gathering are also plentiful. No need, no development. It is interesting that even at this time, about 10,000 years ago, perhaps a little later, the Jomon culture appears. And you could say that it represents the first identifiable cultural tradition in Japan. Look at this ceramic work of art, for example, which is very well done indeed. But that's what makes it interesting, which is hard to find anywhere else in the world, that people who are mostly exclusively engaged in hunting and gathering, who have almost no interaction with agriculture, still make and use pottery. The appearance of this culture before the advent of agriculture is surprising, as pottery making is usually associated with settled societies that rely on agriculture for sustenance. But these people were already interacting with pottery even before they turned to farm. In general, though, the culture of the Ainu will never become fully agricultural, but will remain the culture of hunter-gatherers. The second interesting point related to the Ainu culture is the religious statuettes. In Japan of that period, there is not yet any formalized religion, and the traditional sets of ancient ideas about the world are practiced. Shamanism, the belief in spirits, fetishes, totems, and many other things would later form into the Japanese religion Shintoism. No, but that's not there yet. And here the representatives of the Jomon culture make such interesting, wonderful religious statuettes. And during this period, some interesting features will gradually come into Japan from the continent. For example, from China, and even more from Korea. Because it is much closer, agriculture will come here, but it will not be of much interest to people of this Jomon culture. It will stay simple and primitive. That is, no sedentary civilization will be created yet. The Jomon culture still exists at this time, and it suits everyone just fine. But around the 3rd century BC, things would change very quickly, and Japan would become very different. From the continent, a population would start arriving abruptly, a population that was familiar with metalworking, familiar with the new technologies of the time, and they will break into the Japanese islands, where we still have the Ainu, who, let me remind you, live in about the Stone Age. And when people come in with this set of knowledge about how you can make weapons out of iron, weapons out of copper, and about how farming works, things will start to change very quickly. But we will talk about that in the next video. Well guys, here we are at the end of the first episode of the video about the history of Japan. I hope you liked it. This is my first time making a video for YouTube, plus the subject matter is quite complicated for me. I remind you, I am not a historian, so I tried to be as concise and consistent as I can. I will be glad to hear critics or if someone will point out my mistakes. I'll also appreciate your likes and subscriptions. They help promote the channel. In the next video, we will talk about Yaoi culture, about people from the mainland moving to the Japanese islands. See you in the next one.